Greetings and salutations, beloveds. My name is Iris Sullivan Dare, and I'm here with the gorgeous Ginger Edwards on this eve of the Lunar New Year.
Yeah.
So, and this is the Nurture Pod. This is the place where we explore that edge zone, that no man's land between what is and what we know to be possible. So,
Beautiful.
how are you, my darling?
I'm good, actually. Surprisingly, kind of given the crazy circumstances of the world right now.
Yeah.
Uh, I'm I'm excited for the year of the snake. It's the year of the wood snake, and we just left the year of the dragon. So the year of the dragon was a big one. It's big,
Aren't you a
crazy.
year of the dragon? Is that your year?
No, I'm an
Oh,
ox, actually. I'm a
oh,
water
oh,
ox.
we okay.
But yeah, I guess if you're turning 60 this year, then you are a wood snake. This is the year of the wood snake. So people who turned 60 last year were dragons. Um, and we are
Or
like,
48.
yeah, exactly. But the
Yeah.
wood
Oh,
is what,
oh, oh,
yeah,
oh,
because
oh,
it's
oh,
five
oh.
elements and it changes every time. So it takes like that many cycles to get back to like the wood
Years.
snake and the wood dragon and stuff. So yeah, I'm excited about it. I have large snakes tattooed on myself. It's one of my totem animals, and I think I've always been attracted to the snake because it's about transformation and shedding the skins and creativity and the feminine principle. So I don't know, I feel, even though the world is crazy, undoubtedly crazy right now, I'm excited about the wood snake and the Aquarius energy that's coming on board. So
Did
I'm
you have that
feeling,
book, Stroking the Python, in your 20s?
no, it sounds like it sounds dirty.
No, it's not. It's totally about the divine feminine and
Oh,
and
I'm
like
gonna write that down then.
and like women's health and
Hmm.
I don't know what I did with my copy. I think I lent it to someone a million years ago, but I when I we talked about this. We both had kind of like um were kind of like ushered into this world of feminism in kind of in ways connected to the Michigan Women's Music Festival.
Yes, yes.
And some of the organizers for that, um, there was a feminist bookstore
Mm.
next door to the hippie bakery I worked at. And that's where I got that book.
Cool. Nice. I like it.
So those women were part of the organizing of the in the bakery. I baked bread probably for one of the festivals that you attended. You may have eaten some bread that I baked for it. I
Oh,
never got
that's
to go myself, ironically, but because all my
yeah.
coworkers had dibs because they had more seniority.
That was a fantastic moment. Yeah, those years of going to that festival were definitely formative in many, many ways for my life. So thank you for the bread. And I'm gonna look up that book, Stroking the Python. What a great read for the year of the snake. It does sound dirty though. I can't get over
I
that. It
know.
sounds like
It
a
does
sexual
actually.
act.
It's funny. I was such an innocent. It never even occurred to me. I mean, now when I say it out loud, of course, but
Right,
like
right.
my little 18-year-old self. Oh, Lord.
Yeah, you're like, it's zoology. So I sent you, before we were talking, I sent you today links to two podcasts that I just listened to. Martha Beck, the very famous and wonderful Martha Beck, who I'm a big fan of. Um, she's probably one of the like most famous life coaches out there. She's like a life coach to Oprah and stuff, but she's also a doctor of sociology from Harvard. She's a big, the brilliant woman, brilliant thinker. Just released a book on anxiety called Beyond Anxiety, and she did a couple podcasts about it. And immediately I was like, oh man, like we've got to talk about this. I got to send these to Iris. We need to talk about them. So I know you listen to him, I listen to him, and I want to just bring this to the Nurture Pod because of so many layers that she brings in there about. And it's funny. I feel like she brought a lot of disparate ideas that I've been working with ever since we started talking about nurture culture into like this brain science focus.
Mm-hmm.
And I think it's specifically really good to talk about anxiety right now because, oh my goodness, like
Woohoo!
what an anxiety driven little system we're experiencing right now in our politics. So I feel like it's almost like designed to provoke anxiety.
Oh, I'm sure it is.
I'm sure it is, but I mean, it's doing its job. It's really like, whoa. And so I'm sure everybody listening has been experiencing anxiety. And so hopefully this is going to be really helpful, this conversation for each other and then also for anybody listening. So we're going to talk about, the anxiety spirals that we go into. And yeah, go ahead, because I know you listen to it too.
I did. And the thing that I think is really beautiful is I was texting with you today, like in between sessions with my young artists and at Lewis and Clark School. And when right after that, I wheeled my little cart in and to one of the teachers, and we were having a great thing and the kids were doing their thing, and she was like, "Oh my gosh, Iris, I have to tell you about this book."
Oh, how cool.
And she's like, "And you have to listen to this podcast. It's not the same one you
Mm-hmm.
sent me." So I was sent 3 podcast links
Wow.
today within an
Okay.
hour about Martha Beck. And I realized I have never listened to her before.
Oh, she's great. Yeah, I've
So
listened to a lot.
anyway, so I just slurped up the 2 that you sent me, and I haven't listened to the third one. And I just got her book in Audible. I haven't stuck. So
Yeah,
I'm
I
gonna
did
listen
too.
to it. So
Mm-hmm.
I'm gonna listen to it. But I do agree that like what I got out of it as a newbie to her,
Mm-hmm.
and just listening to, I actually 1.5 I didn't get quite finished, but is that looking at how anxiety is a natural response. Of course, it's like, and how that works in our brain. And it's like back to that, it makes sense that you feel that way. Always
Mm-hmm.
makes sense that you feel that way. And here's
Mm-hmm.
why. It's, here is the sense of why it makes sense that you feel that way. And then the whole thing with creativity just rings like the Liberty Bell for
That
me.
was the part when she
That's
went into that side of it that I was like, oh my gosh, this is Iris's, this is it.
this
This
is it.
is nurture
Yep.
culture. This is what she's
Yes.
talking about. Because so let's break this down so we don't just talking about the thing and
Yeah,
we'll
yeah,
start
yeah.
explaining it a little bit. But that was literally the part where I was like, oh, my goodness, it's really exciting to hear her put all these pieces together. So bottom line is, it starts kind of the premises, and I think we all know this, that anxiety is, I think, the number one mental illness in the world right now. It's ridiculously prevalent, and these are like diagnosed anxiety disorders, like clinical anxiety. So it's we're experiencing a very high level of anxiety as a species right now. And I guess you would say, well, the world's in a lot of turmoil, so that makes a lot of sense, right? That we be I mean, we're just relating to, like, we're in response to the stimulus we're being given. And in a way that's true. But then if you look at it from a different perspective, like, yes, that is true. Yes, and right? Yes.
Yes.
And we also grew up in and have lived in a culture that experiences anxiety specifically through the left hemisphere of our brain. So this is where I think I am a mindset coach. I love thinking about the brain, the mind, how we react to things, how our beliefs affect us. I mean, it's just a really fascinating topic for me. So I guess this book was really right up my alley. But we have 2 hemispheres of our brain. And I know a lot has been written about that. And sometimes you hear like hard scientists being like, oh, whatever, it's not, you can't just say it, like there's one side of the brain and the other side. And because we're normally just using both. We're going back and forth. We're using the left side of the brain for analytical things. For language is the house of language. It is the house of like mathematics. It's where our rationality lives. It's like if you're doing a to-do list and like a spreadsheet, ticking off your, little tasks, your homework, I mean, basically like our time. Yes.
Linear
It's
time.
linear time. It is, it's the only part of the brain that, like, it's the part of the brain that understands and this concept of time, actually. And so you have this like taskmaster, basically. It's the get things done part of the brain. We need it. We absolutely need it to
Yeah.
survive. It's really important. So I'm not saying like, please hear me that the left brain is not a bad thing. However, we also have this other side of the brain, which is the right side of the brain, which includes all the left side of the brain activity in its processes, but it is the side of the brain that is creative. And also, more importantly, I think it's the one that creates meaning. Like it's
Mhm.
the why you're doing something. It makes the connections. And it's the kind of the underpinning of like why you would have the to-do list. Like, what does the to-do list mean if it's not just a random set of tasks, right? Like
And
why?
pattern recognition,
Yeah.
and
And it's
like being
not as
able to see big picture, but
big
in a
picture thinking.
non-verbal way.
Yes, nonverbal is key. And she said it, I think, in that the only three verbal things the right side of the brain does is jokes, songs, and what was the third? Poetry. So
Wow.
those are the only three. And then, what's cool about all this is that this isn't just conjecture. They actually have mappings of the brains now. Neuroscientists can study this, like what part of your brain is lighting up. For example, when you're doing poetry or telling a joke, like it's the right side. But that is the only verbal part that lights up the right side. Mostly language is in the left hemisphere. And this is important because we have a type of brain that makes little stories up about things, like, and that's a uniquely human component to our brain. Every animal has like a fear response. So like if you have another animal charging at you, like a big scary water buffalo or something, like we have these little oh my god fear responses that are built in as a survival mechanism, and we share that with almost every most animals on the planet. We will react to defend ourselves, fight, flight, freeze. These are all like the primal built-in reaction modes. However, what we have that other animals don't have is that we have this part of our brain that makes a story
So we
about.
could talk ourselves into the water
Exactly.
buffalo.
So we create a story about the water buffalo thing, and then we can think about it later. Like, oh my God, what if that water buffalo shows up again today when I go to the watering hole? Like, and we can and those stories in our brain, and which is existing, that language ability, that ability to create that story is left brain thinking. So when we create these little stories, it actually produces like a similar response in our bodies that it is like a fight or flight as the actual water buffalo. That's where worry and anxiety start to come in. And now we live in a culture where we have little glowing rectangles in our pockets that when we open them up and look at the news or something, it is like the stimulus, right? The
Yeah.
stimulus coming in of all the horrible things that we should be, that we could, that are I mean, the stories aren't even, we don't have to make them up in our head. They're being
Right.
given to us. They're handed to us on a platter,
Right.
and we're just consuming them. And then it sends our bodies into like, oh my God, well, what if this happens? What if that happens? And we go into these anxiety loops. And so I'm giving you a very abridged, like little version of this. This is important because when this kind of fear response loop gets going, like I look at a story on the news, I go, oh, my brain makes a little, I'm like, there's a stimulus. Anxiety is triggered. I go into a little story about how that might affect me or how it might affect the world or the country, and I start driving this anxiety loop. Where that goes to in the left brain is like a contraction. Usually, it's like, okay, how do I control this? Like, how do I make myself safe? What do I do? Right. So the left brain goes in that direction. This similar stimulus taken with, so the right side of the brain doesn't react the same way as the left side. And Iris, jump in here if I'm missing anything. I don't want to be talking the whole time. But is that okay? Let me stop with the left brain. What else would you want to add about that?
I think that it's pertinent. The It's not from the Martha Beck thing, but
Mm-hmm.
from some other stuff about the brain that I've explored. And which is that, when people have had separation of their two brains from an injury, or for like
Right.
sometimes, um like they sometimes would do that for epilepsy, which is like kind of uh an electrical storm between the two hemispheres. So when that is severed, that the connectivity between the two sides of the brain, there's this syndrome called alien hand syndrome,
Yes.
where the two sides of your brains are not agreeing on the best course of action. And usually, so like the 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 left hand, which is the right brain, might be like you're trying to pick up the phone to call somebody, and your left hand is trying to wrestle the phone away and then hold it so you can't get at it
Right.
with your and so it's like I really think about when we live in a culture that completely denigrates all of that yin experience, all of that creativity and connection to each other and all of that, when it's been like when we're saying we live in a material world and it's only about facts, ma'am. And
Mm-hmm.
like, that it's only about the left side of the brain. It's not about the right side of the brain at all. That's bad. That's
Mm-hmm.
kind of like I always feel like that's like the alien hand syndrome. All of those
Yeah.
stories are like exactly the same as your left hand trying to, you know,
Yeah.
punch
That
you in
is,
the
yeah, no, totally. And that is actually, she talks about that as people who have strokes on different sides of the brain. So if the right side of the brain becomes like if you have a stroke on your left side, then the right side of the brain is the only thing that's there. So she wrote this book with after long conversations with another like Harvard scientist who was like a neuroscientist who had a stroke, a left hemisphere stroke, lost all use of the left hemisphere and became nonverbal, became like couldn't identify like, any object, couldn't name anything, couldn't figure out what time, all the left things were down, which is really devastating in the world we live in. However, this same neuroscientist was like, she was kind of in a state of complete like bliss and union
Mhm.
and ecstasy. And just, yeah, but she couldn't verbalize anything. And it took her like 8 years to rebuild that part of her brain back up. People who have strokes, and we'll talk about that in a minute, but people who have strokes on the other side, so they lose the right side, I guess. The left side has the ability to like not recognize the right side at all. Like it doesn't believe that even the right side of the body is there. Like it actually won't even see it. Like if you,
Oh.
yeah, like it won't even acknowledge that it has that other side of the body. Like it's like, nope, that's not my leg. Like no idea what you're talking about. And so it is, and that is part of the function of the left brain to be analytical is that it takes things in parts. Like it isn't able to see whole things, and it will deny anything that it doesn't agree with. Like it's like really, and if you present evidence to the left brain that it feels very strongly that is true, it'll just actually raise like a fear response. Like, no, 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 now I'm going to defend it even more because this is me and
Oh.
you're attacking me, right? Like this is my rationality. And if you attack my rationality, then that's a threat. So it takes it as like that. So presenting evidence to the left side of the brain doesn't actually even help. It also believes that it's completely right, like
Always.
100% always correct to the point of insanity. Like, like you can present like contrary evidence, but if your right brain is not engaged and your left brain, it will not. It'd be like, no, I'm absolutely correct. The sky is orange. Like I believe that, like 100%. That's my thought about it. So, and it definitely has an us and them response. Like it's everything's a war. Everything's like offense, defense. It's highly individualistic. It prefers to be like it's just let's make it as simple and controlled. It prefers like man-made controlled things over nature because nature's changing and there's all these things that are changing and not in its control. So the left brain actually prefers like planned out, itineraries and city streets and like things that it's created. The brain has created and understands its function. So you go into this kind of, and she talks about this really becoming a part of like the 17th century where you get into this Western rationality, this whole group of, white males who decided like, oh yeah, the world can be divided up into these boxes and we can, and this is like the beginning of like the Western scientific mind, which of course isn't all bad. However, this kind of drove the same because they started being like, and everything else is fake. Everything else is, we call it woo-woo, right? And that's what the
Yeah.
culture does call it now. Anything that doesn't fit into this little box of evidence that I've decided is important doesn't exist. And that's how the left brain functions. So this whole idea like became like the colonialism. I mean, they were able to go to different countries and extract resources and people and enslave them and all these things. And they didn't have a problem with it because they like that left brain thinking could segment these things out and be like, no, 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 like we are, we're the superior brain here. We know why we're enslaving these people to make this profit, to make, you know what I mean? It doesn't have the morality of like the
So
connecting to the bigger picture. It's like, this is what, and so it is like very much tied in with the culture that we live in today, stemming back
yes.
to this. And that's important to understand because as we function in a culture that is extremely, from the educational system, from birth on up, focused on getting us into our left brain, because that's where like the rational human, in our culture, like that's where you want to be efficient, productive, successful, safe.
And it's in our society actively not just devalues emotional work, it denies it exists.
Right. And that's that part of the brain. Like it doesn't
Even
it
exist. It's
dismisses
not,
it.
it
Yeah, it
totally, yeah.
dismisses it unless
It,
it can create some kind of like box for it, right? So like art in our culture, I think, or like creativity is put in like, it's either dismissed as woo-woo, not, not important at all, invalidated, or it's got a little box like it's valuable in this way. Like if it serves like some function that,
propaganda.
yeah, exactly. Or it's worth money, or it's, you know what I
Yeah.
mean? Like if it could find a little box for it. So I think
Well,
is,
and oh, you,
no, go ahead.
so one other thing that just sparked for me is what is the role of, um, so, like as our brain is developing and like toddlers are having this and young babies are having this incredible connecting the dots brainstorm that's happening and then as we develop our brain prunes so that we're kind of like, and that's how we become enculturated into the paradigm in which we are in. It's like
Mm-hmm.
if we, like little tiny babies when they're like starting, not super tiny babies, but like not crawling babies, when they start babbling,
Mm-hmm.
they make all kinds of sounds. Like both of my kids did lots of clicking and like, and it's like, but it's, and so we would try to click back to them, but it's like we don't have English isn't a click language,
Mm-hmm.
right? And
Yeah.
so like, and probably you're hearing it in the womb too, but it's not just language, like everything, we're being enculturated into everything. And if it's never reflected back to you, then that possibility is kind of lost, right?
Oh yeah.
Until you can, and so go like jump to the point is what was sparked for me and what you were saying is that what is the role that trauma
Mm.
plays in separating from that right side of the brain where there's a lot of emotional content
Yeah.
because people have become like kind of frozen from
Mm-hmm.
trauma, generational trauma. And then it's like, no, 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 like because that all of that like rational, big, crazy shift that happened was happening, like so much had changed
Mm-hmm.
in kind of a very, relatively short amount of time. And so many people had died.
Mm-hmm.
And the whole economies were upended and there was so much war.
Mm-hmm.
Like everywhere, but like Europe was a shit show
Yeah.
for kind
It
of
was.
a
I mean, there's something called the
chunk.
30-year war. It killed more people. I mean, we never even learn about it, but it was like this massive war. And this whole era of like kind of enlightenment just like kind of stems out of just trying to make sense of 30 years of killing that killed like half of Europe, basically. And I, you kind of understand parts of it. I mean, like I said, there's value to rationality, there's value to science, there's value to trying to understand, but it became like its own religion because again, like
Yes.
the left brain doesn't see that itself as wrong. It really can't be confronted with other evidence. Like there was no way like somebody going forth from Great Britain with this mindset, going to the New World to extract whatever they were going to extract, right? People,
They couldn't even
resources.
see what was in front of them.
Well, they couldn't look at it and be like, oh, maybe these people have a point. Like maybe their lifestyle is valuable. Maybe I'm the one that could learn something from them. Like that was not happening. Like they were going with the mindset of like, oh no, I'm right. And this is a resource to use for me, right? Like that is the mindset. Now that mindset very much is still in play. Like it carries through like for the next 400 years in the Western industrial culture. So we are now in 2025, like living with a legacy of this. And like I said, I mean, I think what you said about trauma is really important because, yeah, like the more we take on, I mean, kids are born with like whole brains. Yeah. I mean, like, absolutely. I think Martha Beck says like NASA did a study on like 4-year-olds and every one of them rated like a creative genius on their test. Like 92% of 4-year-olds was like a creative genius level. And then by the time you're adults, it's like less than 2% would rate that because somewhere along the way, right, we get that trained out of us. Like this is not that part of our, literally the part of our brain that has access to that creative kind of thinking gets dampened down in this culture. It is not
oh my God. I totally want to talk about that.
Yeah. I mean, there's so much to talk about. So we're not going to get through all of it. The book or whatever. I mean, there's like, I highly encourage people to go get this book or listen to Martha talk about it. But I'm just super excited about kind of like what it really excited me was that there is like a brain science part of what we're seeing in the world right now.
Yes.
And if you understand that, somehow it gave me, maybe it gave my little left brain, somewhere to put the kind of what it looks like total insanity to me, of the behavior that's being displayed in the world. Like because if you come at it from, if you're in a left brain hemisphere, let's just say you had a stroke and your right side's knocked out. And there actually are social scientists out there, and she talks about them that have written about this, like America, like Western culture is acting like it had a brain hemisphere stroke. Like there's so little right brain activity being like displayed in terms of how we relate to the world. Everything's like about productivity and a list and, checking off this little box. I mean, the goal of the culture is just to create more and more like that's why it feels like there's never enough. Like one of the things I look at with Elon Musk and people like that, it's like, when is enough? Like how much money do you need? Like how much control do you need? Like it feels insane to me that people
I think it is insane.
more
I think
and more and more.
Yeah.
It actually is insane. And I think we should start talking about it as like a left brain kind of like dominance illness. Like you're so like the left brain would never conceive that it's enough because the left brain always feels like it's under threat and it wants more power and more control. And there's just never, and there's never enough to satisfy that part of our brain. Like it has to have it unless you have the right brain talking to it. So I want to talk a little bit about the right brain then. And like I said, most of us are using both at the same time. That's how humans function. But what was so fascinating to me, and one of the reasons I was like, we have to talk about this on the Nurture Pod, was when she said, in most of human culture, like we are living in kind of an aberration. Like the part of the culture we're living in now is so weird compared to most of human evolution, right? Most of our evolutionary time on the planet was not spent in this like extreme left brain society. It's very, very unusual, the culture we're living in right now, which is, she says, is why we all have like rabid anxiety because like that's totally that's like one of her underpinnings to this premise. Like the reason we all have like chronic anxiety is because we are living in a very strange left brain dominated.
It's kind of bewildering.
Yeah, which is chronically anxious. That part of our brain loops in to chronic anxiety loops. Like that's what it does. Now let's talk about the right side of the brain. So the right side of the brain is, like you said, it's the creativity for sure. But it's also where we understand like the why, like the purpose, the meaning of what we do. And I think the part that fascinated me more than anything, what she said was like, imagine you're in a culture, and this is something that's been on planet and it is most cultures still on the planet today, where like the purpose of your life is connection. The purpose of
Yes,
your life is
yes, yes,
creativity. The
yes.
purpose of your life is, yeah, like you understand that, you wake up in the day and like your purpose is not to accumulate more digits in your bank account and to, go to work and be productive. It's to weave a basket or, go out, and you understand like your relationship with nature, with the people around you, your place and what you represent for the culture you're in and what you bring. And that part of the brain is indomitable, like that big meaningful part that understands your role in the world and your purpose, then tells the left side of the brain, okay, I want to weave a basket or make a meal or organize a ritual or whatever. And then it says, okay, left brain, let's make let's figure that out, how to do that. We need this many reeds to weave the basket. We need this much dye to dye the different colors.
So it's like the
It
job
gives,
boss.
yes, it gives the left brain a job. It's like, this is what we do, right? That's what the left brain is for. The left brain is there to help serve the purpose.
It's the servant, not the leader.
Exactly. Now we have the taskmaster with no purpose. And the only thing that the taskmaster knows is important is just to like get, be more productive, get more stuff, try to stay safe. And there's no end to that because it doesn't understand what's enough. Like the left brain is incapable, and it doesn't think it's wrong.
So my sister, oh, you go.
This is well, I think just want to get this out. This is why it's so interesting. If you think about a culture, it's like, oh, I'm going to make a beautiful meal. She used this example in the podcast, I think, that I sent you, which is so great. Like, I'm going to make a beautiful meal. We're going to gather. We're going to connect. We're going to celebrate and gratitude. Thanksgiving. Okay, let's just use Thanksgiving as an example.
Yeah.
And she relates a story about, being stressed out and like having to make this meal with like a certain amount of dishes and like having 3 kids and like, stressing out about it. And like this whole thing that she has to do. And it's like, that's the left brain taking Thanksgiving. And then we've all experienced it. We just got all this stuff we have to do. It's got to look this way. It's got, we want everyone to show up and have a good time. But the left brain is all stressed out about it. And it totally misses the purpose, which is connection. You know what I mean? Like,
yeah.
It's about like gratitude and connection. And actually, to the point of, if you say, well, like, what are you grateful for? People are like, oh God, I don't want to talk about that. Like, they just came over to get through the meal. You know what I mean? And so the right brain is like we don't even it's offline, but it's like, it's dismissed. It's like, it's not important.
Yes.
That we're grateful or that we're connecting. We're doing the thing, right? We've checked off the little boxes. We did Thanksgiving or we did Christmas. And then it turns it into this like kind of miserable like exercise and like checking off a list. And so that is like one of the little minor examples of like what the culture starts to look like. It's joyless. It's kind of anxiety ridden. Yeah, we produce a thing that's supposed to look like a thing. It's also very conformist. Like, we want to make sure our Thanksgiving looks and feels like the correct or whatever, that we're doing it right, whereas the right side of the brain, it wouldn't matter. Like, it's all about connection and getting together and sharing a meal. It doesn't, there's no point in stressing out about it. That's like the right brain would understand that. It would imbue the left brain with that meaning, right? So I feel like that was an example that kind of rocked my world a little bit as I listened to it. I was like, oh, I've been on that side, and I've been on the other side where you can drop into like, oh, whatever. And of course, joy usually ends up being the other experience where you're not so worried about the task. You understand the purpose is connection. And as long as connection happens, it was successful, or, people feel better. So, okay, go ahead. So now I've talked a lot, but I think that for me was where I understood how the left brain function in our culture without the right brain giving it any purpose or meaning goes crazy. Like, it's just about going to work, literally crazy, going to work, making money, trying to get enough money so you feel safe, so you can have, your retirement, and then sit on your little pile of gold until you die. Like, that's kind of the list that the culture gives you. Like, what other reason you know what I mean? There's not like people, that's what they do. Like, they go, that's like, and then you get people, and also like,
the thing that's interesting to me is that it's sold as this highly logical and rational, but it's completely bonkers.
Yes.
And so I love that that the thing of like realizing it's not capable of accepting that it's could be wrong or misled, because it's like, you know, it's
Yeah.
got it's do you know that yeah. I
It's
was
like
thinking
one of the examples she gave was like people who are in a cult who think like Steve is the like whatever guy, like
that's
some
yeah.
Steve is like the messenger of the next generation or whatever. And if they're approached and they're like, well, actually, Steve is just this guy and blah 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 blah, they've shown that when approached with evidence, they will double their belief deepens in Steve. Like they will double down twice as hard in their belief because that's the left brain being like, no, like now you're threatening this whole idea that I've got. So I've already figured this out. Like this is how I stay safe, or this is what I've bought into. Therefore, it becomes like it is insane. It becomes like a defense mechanism to protect the story. And it is
So
about stories.
so what I really liked about I only listened to part of the first one, which was why anxiety, and then
Yeah.
the second one was how to fix it or something.
Mm-hmm.
I can't remember. But talking about what happens to the brain when we are creative, and specifically what happens to the
Yes.
brain when we are creative together. And
Yes.
I do like, I'm just hearing this now, and you talking about the doubling down of the cult,
Mm-hmm.
and how when someone like I think we've all had conversations in which you're talking to someone and there's no give. There's no it's not actually an exploration or trying to figure it out. There's not there's it's like a court case.
Mm-hmm.
And it's already they already have the sentencing already dialed in, you know? So like there's just no way to really get in there.
Mm-hmm.
And so I do think that just hearing you say this idea of like, when does the right brain get access
Yeah.
to to help? Because I do think that we talked about this, it's like it can only come within, like you can lead a horse to water but you can't make it
Totally.
drink. And I think really it's like you can't get someone's left brain to change its mind. You can
No.
only the only way in is through
The right brain.
the right brain. And so
Yeah.
it's like
That's
that
right.
is the watering hole.
That's right. So you can't argue with the left brain. Let's just like that's really interesting on itself. Like stop trying to, right?
That is very freeing.
Very freed. And also like we've all had that experience. Like it just that's not the way to do it. And I think what's interesting for me, like being an environmentalist and I'll say in present moment too, but like
You
an
gave it up.
activist environmentalist in my past, we're very active in it. Giving people more information. Like that's kind of like, oh,
I used to think that was going to be the answer.
that's
They
a
just don't
strategy. Yeah.
know. They
Yeah, they
just don't
just don't
know.
know. And at some point, maybe that's true. Like there are some people who might get the information. And here's the key word here: get curious to learn more. So this is how the right brain gets involved, is curiosity. And the opposite of anxiety, according to Martha Beck, is not calm. Like we would say, oh, you're super, super anxious. We'll do deep breathing, like calm it down. That's great and everything, but that's a momentary fix.
Yeah.
Because the left brain can be calmed for a moment and then it'll go right back into its story as soon as you stop meditating, right? It'll go right back in. However, to get your other part of your brain engaged, it's the opposite of anxiety is curiosity, because curiosity is the right side of the brain. And I thought it was so cool because she described it like, okay, there's a horrible car crash and you're driving by and it's the part of you that wants to look over at the car crash, like the rubbernecking thing that we all have this tendency to do, or equivalent, like, which was interesting, the people like the urge to like read or watch like real crime or murder, detective murder
movies.
mysteries. And I do those things. And I was
She's
like,
a detective, but she's psychic.
right? What is it that we're so fascinated with murder and killing? And like, that there's a part of us that, so the amygdala, which is that like emergency response little internal part of our brain that's very deeply evolutionary survival brain, it exists on the left and the right side. Now, the right side of the brain is stimulated in a different way. The left side of the brain goes into fear and constriction and control. Like, we need to control the situation. The right side of the brain is the part that looks over at the accident. Once it realizes that it's safe, like I'm not in immediate danger, it gets curious. And the reason evolutionary for that is because, yes, we don't want to like be hurt, but once we realize we're not going to be hurt, there is a part of our brain that kind of wants to see how that thing died so we can learn from it. Like, we need to learn like what happened so I don't do that, right? Like, so there is an insatiable part of our little brain that's curious as a part of survival. Curiosity is woven into our survival strategy. We need to understand like, oh, you ate that plant and died? Like, okay, so what does that plant look like? You know, like where was the body? Like, that's a part of us that it's kind of, we needed that to survive and get to the place where we are. So it's in us. It's a deeply in us. And we can use that. Because if we go into curiosity, it goes into a different part of the amygdala, which is the right side. The right side, after curiosity is sparked, it starts to make connections. And like, say you see a dead body like next to a plant or whatever, and you get a little curious, you're like, oh, wait, like maybe it was that plant, and maybe, but it's like, that's the part that gets creative. It starts to make connections between things that doesn't seem related to the left brain. Left brain is everything's in little piles, like little broken up, like scientific disciplines. Really, you can see how we organize our culture. Like economics is here, health is here. Well, that's the left brain, likes to break things apart. The right brain's like, how is this all connected? And so it gets curious, and then it moves into creativity. And I mean creativity in the broadest sense. I'm not talking about drawing. I'm talking about creativity in the sense that the neural pathways of the right brain are actually physically longer. The nerves are. They have to make a longer connection between one thing and the other thing. So they actually, she said the brain is actually a different like shade. It's actually whiter because it's wrapped in like more myelin sheathing. The right side, because the nerves are longer, because they're like accessing different parts of the brain to pull in information and make these kind of connections that aren't necessarily evident until we figure it out, until our brain's like, oh wait, like this is connected to that. Oh, interesting. So once we are being creative and we make some realizations, then oftentimes we want to connect with others to like share information and see if that's true, like get it validated, get their input. I feel this way. I think I understand this. How about you? Do you see this? Is this what that is? So the right brain goes through curiosity, creativity, and connection. That's the loop the right brain goes through.
Were we talking about that thing about the study of what happens to people in a crisis situation in World Trade Center? Did we talk about this, or did I learn about this after I talked to you?
This is probably the perfect time to talk about it.
So I cannot remember where I was listening to this, but she was talking about, it's pretty predictable how we respond when a crisis happens. Mm-hmm. So the first thing that happens when there's a gunshot or there's something, people are like, the first thing we do is kind of deny it, which makes sense, right? That left brain's like, no, that couldn't possibly be a gunshot. Right. We're sitting here in the cafe. And then the next thing of like, wait, what? And so then we turn to each other, and people will turn to each other no matter who it is and try to start figuring it out. Like, did you just hear that? I did. What? And then so then they have to go through this process of like, what are we going to do now? And then you can act. So like one of the things, like they did these, and so like during that denial phase, you're kind of, it's totally like, it's like the left, after this conversation, I'm like, oh, it's the left brain's freak show. It is. And they talked about during 9/11, it took people longer to get down than they anticipated from all of their calculations ahead of time, because people had to talk to each other before they could evacuate. And also that during that denial thing, like people took the time to shut down their computers before running to the exits.
Yeah.
Like, people like weren't really like, it takes a while for us to grok this thing is happening. Yeah. But that and then the very next thing that we need, as soon as we get into like what's really happening, we want to connect to the people around us.
Yes.
And that's the very first thing that we reach for. And it's like, you think about it like, no, I was talking about babies. I just love babies. But like, you're like, what does a baby do? They're always like reaching.
Yeah.
That's like such a primal thing. It's like if you startle a newborn, they reach to
Yeah.
grab onto
Yep.
you. And so I just feel like
And also like kids, they ask endless questions like, why is
oh
this? What
yeah.
about this? How is this connected to this? Like, because we have this other part of our brain more engaged in childhood. Like we want to know everything, understand how it all connects to everything else. Whereas
So
you get to adulthood and you're like, I don't know that. Like it's a perfect example, right? The left brain, and you're at work and you're like, this isn't real. Like this isn't part. Like the left brain's taking a long time. It's denying that there's this other thing.
yes, yes, yes.
Go into denial. Like this is not happening. I live, this is not part of my daily routine, right? Like it's not on my to-do list to get bombed and run. And another interesting thing about emergencies is that fear is different than anxiety. So like if you actually are in a situation where you're in real fear, like there's an emergency, like a fire coming right at your face or whatever,
Yeah.
people have this incredible moment of, most people describe those times as being very like almost in slow motion, like as they are, they get hit by a car and they go flying through the air. They remember it like in kind of like this very clear kind of slow motion, and their body like shuts the brain down. It's like the body just takes over. Like it's pure adrenaline at this point. Your body's going to like go into a shape that knows how to fall, or, you know what I mean? It's going to react. It's going to like literally people have lifted cars off of children and they have like superhuman strength. Like things happen in this moment of exact fear when the body is like, brain's offline. It's my job
We're
now to
taking care.
out of, yeah, we're going to get you out of this. So that is like a state. Anxiety and trauma, which you kind of touched on before, is different because anxiety is the story about it. It's not the moment of it is actually like we're pretty well equipped as animals to handle those moments. The body and the brain chemistry takes over. It's afterwards, or just thinking about it, making it up, right? Like we don't even have to have gone through it, but that's where trauma is not the thing that happened. Trauma is the
The
reaction.
app, in the
It's stored in
compensation
the
and the
body, the story
yes.
about it. It's the story about what happened and how we react to it in our body. And the
Well,
thing is,
and
our brains can't tell the difference between that story and the thing. Like you can make yourself really anxious by sitting in a room and thinking about drowning. You can start telling yourself stories and imagining it and you can work yourself into anxiety about having your heart broken, or about losing your job, or about any story you tell yourself. You can trigger these same physical responses
oh
in the
yeah.
brain. However, if you're doing that and you're in an anxiety loop, that's in your left brain. Your brain is taking that. And so one of the ways you can get out of it, which is what this book is kind of like pointing towards, is that you want to go to your right side, because your right side will take it and get curious and creative and connect.
Well, they like the statistics about people that have a creative practice, whether they do so much better, heal faster. Like that was, like I started writing when I was doing the whole cancering thing because I needed a means to communicate with my family, and they're just so numerous, and I didn't want to be talking on the phone.
Yeah.
And so like that was my initial thing. But then like if I look at how many words I wrote the year where I was giving them the blow by blow and, some creative blah, 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 there's that how many words they are. But the most words I wrote was like after treatments ended for like the next 2.5 years, processing what that meant, how that worked, what was my trains of thought, like that's where the 100,000 words are. And
Yeah.
I feel like, oh my God, that was so I feel like I don't like it was like a spell to like sit down to write. It was like it was like totally transformative.
Mm.
It was very transformative. And it's like I think, like art and music and all that and dance and like that's all that is
That's whole brain. That's, we're using
that's
your whole
yes,
brain. And that's
yes.
why it's healing. because you're pulling in, like it says, the left brain will be there. You're writing words, but you actually are making connections. Like as you write, like as you journal, as it's so good for you, you're using your whole brain. Your right brain's coming in and making all these connections as you've given the servant the right job. Like I am trying to find the meaning behind this thing that happened to me, right? And so I'm going to write about it. And like and now the left brain, yeah, it can compose words. It knows what letters mean. It can do it. Like
Yes.
it can create a
Yes.
structure for you to read and understand yourself. However, you're using your whole brain, and that's why it's very, very healing. You're not just ignoring things. You're letting this curiosity. That's really where it comes from, right? Like I'm curious. I want to understand this. I want to know more about
So,
myself.
so here's the thing also, like how I've been observing. So I just finished up my 29 classrooms. So I'm doing like each month it's a different lesson. So I just did the same lesson 29 times with these
Mm.
different classes. And part of this month's lesson was talking about abstract art. And we had pieces from Michaela Souza, who is the artist, featured artist. She lives in Astoria. Um, and we had these 3 pieces of abstract art that the children were invited to look at, and then we had a discussion first with they within themselves, and then with each other, and then with the whole class about what do you see.
Mm.
And it's really interesting because it's variable by age. You can tell as they get older, that first they're only willing to see the very surface.
Mm.
And then if you once somebody starts talking about something and then they realize, oh, I can look and see what I see, which is very imaginative. It's like,
Yeah.
it's like, finding shapes in the clouds, right?
Mhm.
And once that kind of like got opened up for them, suddenly they're like it's like at first there's like 2 hands up, and once the like floodgates get open and it's like they realize, oh, this is a space where we get to do this. Boom,
Mhm.
boom, 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 boom. So
Yeah.
many hands go up. And which was anyway, so that's data point 1, is that when we are creative together, it untangles and unknots
Yes. Yes.
anxiety within us
Yes.
in a way that doing math together probably doesn't.
No, and I love that. It's such a beautiful example. And I think what she says in one of those interviews is that the reason we make art essentially is for connection. Like we make art because like this is me. Like our brains are
Yes.
like, this is the right brain being like, I don't know, this is how I see it. This is how I see the world. Like this is how I see what's going on. What do you think? Like, and we want to consume art for the same reason: music, poetry, art, a meal. Like, I mean, it's very
Yes,
broad, like
yes,
a
yes.
cloth, a color, um, whatever it is, like that is culture. Like, and all art is us expressing, like, this is me. How are you? Like, what do you think? Like,
So
do you see? I mean, are we human? Like, is this happening for you too? Like, and it's kind of the basis of why we're doing it.
and so like
And it's a
this
drive,
op
right?
and
Like it's such a drive.
yes. And so like how do we okay, so this connects the dot to this other thing. So since I talked to you, I learned about this Lebanese American artist, Atel Adnan, who I'd never heard of before. And um she was an amazing person. She could speak like 5 languages. She was a journalist and a writer, and she was a professor, I think, of like art history or art philosophy or something. And she was in her 40s, but she wasn't doing any art. And one of the other professors, who was a friend of hers, was like, how could you be teaching about this and not be doing any art? And kind
Mm.
of challenged her to do it. And it made her think about like, well, why did I stop making art? And she realized that somebody told her when she was like, she kind of remembered it happening, that her art looked clumsy,
Mm.
that she should focus on something else.
Yeah.
And that I think also that men are the artists.
Mm. Hmm.
and then she was like, wait a minute, And so she just died at age 96 a couple of years ago. So she was born in the 1920s. So this was all happening in like, what is that, the 60s or something when she was in her 40s.
Mhm.
And so she realized I do want to paint. And so she just started painting, but she had no quote training, even though she had, was doing art history. But like she started doing these very simple um very flat, like solid color, uh, these landscapes. And she like painted like this mountain that was outside where near her, like over and over and over again. But anyway, fast forward, she ends up having this like getting really popular much later in life, but she had collectors, she had people that were, she was acknowledged earlier than that, but she like made art for like 50 years because she lived such a
Mm.
long life after that, probably because she started doing art. And
Mhm.
so anyway, the reason I'm bringing this up is because because with my after school kids, I did this, we did an activity based on her things and we did landscapes and we're painting them. But part of the story for these kids is like, these kids are the age that she was when she stopped making art,
Mm.
which I think about all the time because when I teach older people, so I hear that story so often. It's like, yeah, I've been wanting to
Mm.
do, I waited till I retired to finally do something creative.
Right.
And when you ask them when they stopped, they were like 8, 9, 10, 11, 12.
Yeah.
Usually under 10 was
Yeah.
when, and so it's like, I am like with all of these kids that are in that age. And I just feel like my message to them is like, don't give it up. Don't keep going,
Yeah.
keep doing it
Yeah. And
because
I want to be really clear, like, again, like in our left brain culture, it's like, oh, that's nice, you're making art. Like, oh, what a nice little thing you're doing, right? But no, like according to this research, like this is not a small thing, like that what you're doing with
right,
these
right.
kids. The
Yes.
culture thinks like, oh, it's a little extra activity, it's extracurricular, it's like a nice thing that they can do on the side of their actual education. But if you take the trajectory of where the left brain has taken us, when you drop the right brain out and you take the left brain to its extreme moment, which I think we're living in right now. I think we're at like a critical breaking point of this kind of left brain insanity that we've created, this unquenchable desire for power, money, and control, which is what the left brain will end up doing. And we're seeing it represented at very high levels right now. And we're going to see some pretty devastating and already devastating effects from it. The solution, I mean, like really, I think at the base level, the solution is not more facts, more, you know what I mean? It's not like, it
Yes.
really is a much deeper shift. And I think this is what we're talking about with nurture culture. This is why we have this podcast, which is why I got so excited about hearing her talk about this. But all of a sudden it gave me like language again for
Yes.
why this is so important, why nurture culture is important, because we have to heal this disconnect in our brains. And the way we do that is through creativity, like curiosity
Finger
and
painting
creativity and
together.
connecting. Yes. Like that is actually like in response to what's coming at us right now. And I know everybody's feeling it, this anxiety. This is why I wanted this to be the Aquarian new moon, lunar Imbolc message. We have to resist the reactive impulse to push back with more left brain energy. Like, no, like we're right. We have the facts. Like this is what we should do. Like that is the left brain it's against a left brain. And like they're never gonna agree and they're never gonna admit that they're wrong, like it's not the way to go
It's
about it.
like, yeah, it's like a
It's like the culture that created the problem cannot be solved with the same brain that, the solutions are not
yes.
going to come from the same part of the brain that created the problem. So if we acknowledge that this is part of the problem, this left brain hemisphere dominance and the way it thinks about the world and how it ignores everything else but itself and doesn't understand the connections to other things and thinks it's right, exclusively thinks it's right. Our way out here as a culture, as a people, and maybe the survival of our actual species at this point, because we've altered the climate to the point where we're looking at extinction level event. I mean, this is the insanity of the left brain has taken us to the brink. I mean, very literally. We're at a moment where I think we have to, as a matter of survival, go about this in a different way. And
Yes.
it can, and so to break the anxiety hold that the left brain has on us with all and everything, and like it is designed to do that. This culture to sell us stuff is designed to push on these buttons. So, and the political people in power right now are very adept at how to do this, right? Like they are very good at overwhelm
Yes.
and anxiety, very,
Yes.
very skilled. So if you are listening to this and you want to not go into these anxiety loops, this is a great book for you to get. It's called Beyond Anxiety by Martha Beck. And also, the key here is what me and Iris actually talk about, which I thought was so cool. It is nurture culture. It is to take yourself, not to not respond. Like that's not what we're saying. Don't like just go paint a painting and be like, la la la, it's not happening. Like that's not what we're saying.
Oh.
It is to take it and get curious. Like that's your first thing. Like, oh, this is really curious. And even get curious about your own reactions. Get curious about your own reactions, get curious about your own responses and your own triggers. But then like get that, let that lead you into creativity. Like, how would you like to respond? You know, how
Well,
what does that look like for you? Like, what does your life look like if you went down that track? And then she wrote a whole book about it. So we're obviously giving the cliff notes here, but it does take you in a different direction. It doesn't look the same as where like traditional activism has been for me. When I get slow down, that's the first part. You have to slow down and remember that you are safe in the immediate moment. So you see something on your screen like, oh my God, all the inspector generals just got fired. You're like, and you're like, oh my God, there's no oversight of any of this stuff. And you take a deep breath and you're like, okay, but me right now, I'm doing a podcast. I'm sitting in my house. I'm warm. I'm safe. That's important for your brain to recognize. Then you can decide what story am I going to allow to run here, because this is my brain and I can choose. If I choose a story that leads me towards creativity, it'll enact a feedback loop that creates a different culture, that creates a different kind of response.
yes.
It creates a healthier body, and it creates joy in us. Like this is the part of us that connection, creativity. This is where our actual happiness and joy and health lie. Like you said, your health is completely up and tied up with this. Like we know
Oh,
that
yeah.
stress causes illness, and we know that creativity and connection heal illnesses. Like we feel better, we repair, we can handle, we're more resilient. All of these things, like they've study after study has shown that when you're in that creative connection cycle, you are more resilient and healthy, and you can think of things that the culture needs. Like our culture needs new thoughts. We
Well, think of
need creative solutions.
we
We need
we told
outside of the box, right? We need things
so
that no one's ever thought of before. We need those now. Like we need those to start emerging. Like, oh, what about this? Like we could do this
so
completely differently.
so I yes, 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 yes. And I have three things. One, Michelangelo, you critique by creating
Mm,
is, and which is like always useful. Like it's like,
yeah,
I don't like how this, like I don't like how this is. It's like, well, how could you do it better? How can we
exactly.
do this better next time? How can we do that better right now? And like take a step towards that.
Yes, absolutely.
It's like, I want there to be more courtesy. It's like, well, I'm gonna go out of my way to open doors for people. Like,
Yeah.
like
How would that look?
how would
Yeah.
that look? What does that, whatever it is, right? So like critique by creating, I think is really a good motto for these times.
Mm-hmm.
And I had three and I lost them.
Oh, number two, Iris.
Number two. Number two, give yourself permission to imagine. So this is another one from the kids this last 3 weeks, which is we were talking about people migrating and like how would you travel from Hawaii to Oregon? Because artist is a native Hawaiian person. And so we talked about that and navigation and then I'm like, and like only a couple kids were willing to raise their hand. But then when I said, if we were in an imagination world, how might someone get from Hawaii to Oregon? Suddenly we had pink, fluffy pink unicorns and magic carpets and dragons and surfboards that could expand into a floating house that you could sleep in and like like
Yeah.
on fire.
That is such a great example of the right brain being so generative, right? Like the right brain is incredibly generative. Like it'll give you so much if you take that,
Give it a little doorway.
let the left brain breathe a little bit. Like the left brain's control. Like, well, let me know about the facts of like what could actually like. You'd be like, no, it's all about imagine it. And then the right brain's like, oh, I'll take over. I got millions of ideas, and it does,
It
absolutely
does.
does.
Which is my third thing is my friend Margaret, who's passed away, but her word of wisdom, which I think is just brilliant, is she was like, sorry, I'm all like so wiggly.
Good.
She was talking about energy healing, and she totally did have some healing touch hands, and she's like, but I can't, if my brain, I have to trick myself. And so like I think like some heavy weight fell on my foot. We were working at a market together. Anyway, she was like, what I have to say is I'm pretending that the golden healing light of the universe is coming through me and healing this person. And I swear to God, I mean, totally helped. I know I'm very, I totally believe in that stuff. So that works extra good. My placebo is so high tuned for that, which is more brain science. Seeing if you believe in it, it does actually.
That was like, yeah, it's another
not a
conversation.
joke.
Yeah.
But so like that idea of if it's something that seems like really like a stretch to imagine how the world could be if we were taking care of each other, I would encourage people to think of it as just like these kids, like of play. Like I am imagining that I've been given the task of describing the world where we're nurturing and caring for each other. Everybody has.
Yes. So I want to just say, like, one of the most interesting things that she said on that in that interview was that the left brain defines magic as anything that it doesn't understand. So I want to be really clear, like just because the left brain doesn't understand it doesn't mean it's not real. But the left brain, that's what it says. Like it's woo-woo if it doesn't understand it. It's like out of its realm and it's magical, out of bounds, and therefore, yeah, not real. And that's not the truth. That's a thought that the left brain holds on that will give it to us over and over again. It's not in its wheelhouse, therefore it's not real, it doesn't exist. This is like a mental blip, you know what I mean, that is in the culture that our left brain has. And all the things that we say are woo-woo or mystical or magical or whatever, like that is our left brain culture just being like, yeah, we don't believe in that, like we don't have a space for that. That doesn't mean they're not real, because 90% of the other cultures on the planet totally believe in ancestors, absolutely believe in, like, all of nature spirits. Actively right now in 2025, many cultures 100% believe that and experience it as a real phenomena daily. So it's not that it's not real, it's because we live in a culture that dismisses anything that isn't part of the
left brain. It doesn't, it can't fit in the data. So just it's like, what do they call it in museums? They call it it's like a object out of place or something.
Yeah, it's a blindness.
It's like it just gets set aside. It's in
and dismissed in a big lump of things that's just like, nope, doesn't see that, doesn't see
nothing to see here, nothing to see here,
nothing to value, and doesn't fit in my list. It's done. And I think that's really important to remember, that because when you say to pretend it, like pretend to make it real, kind of play, all you're doing is like tricking the left brain, letting the left brain allow the right brain to have a little influence. And this is really healthy, like, because we are so left brain dominant, we've actually changed the chemistry of our brains in this culture. Like, not evolution, like designed differently, because it takes a lot longer for evolution to work, but we have neuroplasticity. So the left brain has got a lot more like development than the right brain does in this culture. So play, imagination, creating, like, these are really, like, for your mental health, these are like essential. And I'd say for cultural health, if we're going to get through whatever this is that we're in, to heal the culture, we have to go into spaces where we're like, I don't know, what could it look like that would be completely different than what we're experiencing right now? Because we're actually experiencing a playbook from, I mean, Nazi Germany. Like this is
Yeah,
a
this is like,
pattern but this is
yes,
not new
this is
stuff.
not,
Like we're
yes.
looking at something that's not even like a couple generations old. Like this is back in play. Like
They're not,
this is,
they're not, they're not,
it's
the
not
good news
original.
is they're not very creative. That's
They're
the good news.
really not creative. This is the same shit that we've seen. Oh, like this is the
Yeah.
same old. This is not creative. They don't have, the left brain doesn't have the ability to be creative. It's just pulling out something, that's been done. So we really have this power to create something very, very different. And I think the 60s were a great example of that. I mean, you saw, all the hippies in the 60s taking all their psychedelics. I mean, talk about an experience, right? They really changed things. There was a huge waves of like total things were done totally differently. And then the left brain culture came back and asserted dominance again. So like, well, we have these waves where like, and we might be going into one of those. We don't know. Like we'll have to see. But I
So
think that encouraging that is the conversation we're having right now. Like we have to
yes,
understand that magic is real. It's just what, so don't let the culture define it. And we
that's
have
a
the
great,
magic.
that's a great book actually by Dean Radin is
There you
Magic
go.
is Real.
Magic is real.
We need a reading list.
Yes, we do need a reading this, but also to end it, I think, it is a really like Imbolc. I just wanted to come back to like where we are right now in the present moment. It's like this perfect, beautiful moment. It's dedicated to these energy of creativity, like the sacred flame, the spark of the flame, for the goddess Bridget, which is a triple goddess of creativity from the Celtic lands, is heavily associated with this time of year. And I've always loved Bridget because she's just like, it's about purification, it's about creativity, it's about all the crafts, like everything, farming, healing, herbs, smithcraft, poetry. Like she is all of it. So if there is a perfect time on this new moon, which is lunar Imbolc, to like invoke this part of your brain, like and do it as activism. Like this is actually how we heal and change the culture. We're not just joking around. Like this isn't frivolous. The left brain will
Yes.
tell us over and over again, oh, that's so nice that you're doing your little whatever. That's not real. This is real over here. No, like really magic and creativity and connection is exactly what the healing that we need to be offering the planet right now. This is it. This is the work.
And is where we have access to problem solving actually. Like it's
100%.
so it's absolutely not frivolous.
It's not, and even if it's just for your own anxiety, this is actually one of the best ways to deeply take care of yourself in a very anxious, overstimulating, overwhelming time.
And
So
it's, and no matter how excited you are to transform things, you need to spend some time in the parasympathetic nervous system for repair and for
absolutely,
it's so
it
yeah,
is
yeah.
where transformation happens. Again, if you think you're transforming things by being in your left brain and trying to figure it out, you got to remember there's a deeper radical transformation that needs to happen here, and it's not going to come from that part of your brain.
I mean,
We need that part of our brain. I'm not saying we're
right.
not going to use it. We're going to use our left brains absolutely to get things done.
Then
But the meaning of it, the purpose, the vision, that is and this will make you a more joyful person. You need to know why you're doing anything. We're not just in resistance. We're not just like, oh my God, stop, this attack. That's not purpose. Like we need to have a bigger understanding of the culture and the beauty that we want to create, and that is why we wake up in the morning. That's why we do the work. That's why we, are here. And then we give our left brain a little job list to get us there. That's great. That's like how we should be on the planet and how we evolved to be, how most of our ancestors lived. They had a much deeper connection and purpose. So I just want to, bring in this beautiful year of the snake, which is, the snake is highly about shedding old skins and like renewing ourselves in a new spirit of energy and creativity. It's the Kundalini. It's so feminine. Like the snake goes into the earth and then comes out, and it's just like related to the fire element because it's cold-blooded and needs heat. And there's just like so much magic in snakes. So I'm just excited for this year, which is crazy for me to say since, if you read the news, you'd be like, I should be terrified. But I'm getting really curious about this new revolutionary idea that is coming through. And I think that's where I'd like to stay. And that makes me excited and curious. And it makes me want to get really creative about imagining what a future could look like on planet Earth that isn't being handed to me by Elon Musk and his
Yes.
weird energy.
Yeah. Yeah.
So this is the reason, again, like we don't want to like be in reaction and talk about politics on this podcast. There's a million other people out there like yammering on about it, which is great. That's fine. It's like the healing is going to come, I think, through this nurture.
And it I would say that being like, this is a messaging, right? We are messaging. And if what we offer to the world is a letter, and it's like when you are hearing this and you're thinking that doesn't resonate with me, then maybe this letter isn't addressed to you. But if it is addressed to you, then maybe we are in some sort of like dharma relationship, and it's some sort of, big gestalt way.
Mm-hmm.
And that, how do we support each other to bring forth the world that we know is possible, that we can,
Right.
that's yeah. So it's if this is resonating with you, then take heart, take courage, my beloveds,
That's right.
because
Take courage from it for
we're
sure.
there. They haven't won yet. The world,
No.
and it,
And then it's not the path to joy. Like there's been so many people, including Martha Beck herself, who's like a life coach to very famous and very wealthy people. And she's like, these people aren't happy. This is not the pile of money that the culture promises you will solve all your problems and make you happy and remove your anxiety. It doesn't, because that path is just like, it comes from anxiety and it's riddled with anxiety. They're actually quite miserable.
Like, think
And
about like Howard Hughes,
you can see
like
that watching them, like
yes,
you can feel how miserable and stressed out they are. They're not in joy. So even if it's just at a real personal level, like happiness, joy specifically, she even divides those two things. Joy exists from creativity, connection, and curiosity. That is our path. So if we are going to be living this life, let's be joyful, and why else are we here? I mean, that's part of the reason we're here. We're not here to struggle, and we're not here to just be in a system of productivity and amassment of things and houses and whatever the culture is telling us that we're here to do, and we're ticking off boxes of mile markers of our success. Like, what? Stop, drop out, man. I started to sound like a hippie. I'm like, drop out of that. Let's find ourselves our actual creative purpose on the planet. Let's align ourselves with that, and then start building that actively. Like, I'm excited. Don't just lay there. That's a freeze mechanism. Don't just like drop out in the way that you're just laying on the couch like I can't deal. That's a trauma response. What we're saying is get active, but do it in this way that's like feeding your right brain, and like, make art, dance, cook, connect,
go for a walk, and
be in
nature, leave offerings.
Yes, exactly. Anything really, that it doesn't have to be what we think. It's like your own spirit will tell you if you get curious about it and start asking yourself, what do I want to do? What do I need? So
and pay attention to your dreams, right? Because that's our right brain is just waiting to talk with us. And
like, and one of the most and beautiful experiences I've been having lately is these labyrinths that my friend Za is making on the beach. And she just draws these like beautiful spirals in the sand, and I play my drum, and people come and walk, and we have a beach fire, and it's so nonverbal. That's why I love it. It's just art, but it's interactive. So people are interacting with art. They're having their own experience. There's music, there's the ocean, there's some fire, and it's just like, you can just feel your right brain being so delighted by all of the things, like it is the perfect little balm for my anxiety when I go to these events, because you just drop into this magic of connection, creativity, beauty, nature. It's got all the things. So you have to think about, they call, triggers are for trauma. They call them glimmers are for your healing joy. Like you're right. Like look for your glimmers that bring you into your right hemisphere. Like what pulls you in that direction, makes you feel connected, creative, curious.
Oh, I love that. Uh,
So glimmer it
okay.
up.
My last thing. So the kids were making collages and then using that to make a print, blah, blah, blah. Today was my last day, and this young lad made like a stag, and then he's like, no, and then he removed it and moved, and then he made it so that it was a stag with reflection of the stag.
Beautiful.
And it was like, it totally felt like our world and the spirit world. I just loved it. It's so
Mm,
gorgeous, and it's like this little brilliance of like, in that when you said the glimmer, it's like there is what we see, and then there's that glimmer of this reflection of
yeah.
this greater world that we're in. And anyway, so just imagine this
Mm,
like mystic stag, and its reflection. It's
mm,
right there. It's like feet to feet, right? Like our
yeah.
mystic self is extending from our feet into the earth, and like it's like we're all here together, and
Yeah.
the ancestors are here to help us. We're not alone.
No,
Anyway,
we're not. And when just to go back to, I think it's Jill Volte Taylor is the name of the scientist who had the hemisphere of her left brain go out of commission due to a stroke. Like she recalls this whole period where she was nonverbal and everything as like the most blissful, connected spiritual experience that she's ever had or can imagine anyone having. And then as she healed herself, I mean, she's a Harvard neuroscientist. So she came out and she made sure that she designed her life to live in nature and to do art continuously and to stay deeply connected with the peace her right brain gave her, because it really was what people talk about in states of deep, deep meditation. And shout out to David Lynch, who passed recently and was like
yes.
a super deep practitioner for like 50 years or something of transcendental meditation and died meditating.
Oh,
He died in meditation posture, which is so sacred in India. That's like the highest attainment, to pass while meditating, just to like leave the body. But he
yeah.
was so, I mean, his whole thing was he had such a creative life. He just produced paintings and art and film, and I mean wrote books, and I mean he talked deeply about like, yeah, the peace. I mean he's a perfect example. Like look at his life of somebody who was deeply in his right brain. His movies definitely, like the images he chose and everything, very dreamlike. And also just that he had this whole meditation side, that he was weaving those two things together seamlessly, like the unified field connected to everything. Like you said, the reflection, like
Mhm.
we are, this energy is a reflection of everything. Like our creative selves, it, I think, does, like the right side of our brain is the part of the humanity that we're supposed to be in. Like we're supposed to feel connected to everything and know that
Yes.
we are part of all life and energetic fields. Like that's our birthright as humans. And it's only just a recent aberration that we're not in that space.
Yes.
So
Oh.
blessings on your work with children and art. Like more than ever, I think I'm just like, oh my gosh, Iris is doing the good work in the world.
Oh,
Um,
I'm so privileged.
yes. So,
Such
but
a
I
privilege.
to everybody listening, just happy Imbolc. I know it's weird out there. We're not trying to not say it's not weird. Like I get it, it's very stressful. We get it.
Yes.
Like
Yes.
we're
Yeah.
not
Oh,
dismissing that in any way. Or but
you're catching us on a high point, but
well,
like
also
believe
just
you
like
me,
I'm
like
trying to think, literally trying to think of the most powerful response. Like not
yes.
to diminish it, but really go deep, deep, deep into like the core of the response. And this is like my best offering right
So
now. I'm sure there'll be more, but like I feel like that book came, that all these words came in one. This is the new moon message, so hopefully it's received. And
mm,
we
mm,
love you
mm.
all.
Mwah.
Happy Imbolc.